Hello everyone and welcome back to Shadow Man Stories. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now, let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Kate Bloodworth, and I've been a forest ranger for 13 years. I've seen plenty of strange things in the Chattahoochee National Forest, but nothing prepared me for what happened on Blood Mountain in October of 1982. I was 35 then, working the backcountry search and rescue operations. Before becoming a ranger, I'd been an emergency medical technician. I'd seen enough death and suffering to stop believing in any kind of loving God. If there was something out there, it sure wasn't paying attention to the good people dying in hospital beds. Blood Mountain is the highest peak in Georgia at 4,458 feet. It got its name from an old Cherokee and Creek battle, but the locals always whispered about other reasons for the name. Stories about mountain spirits that demanded blood sacrifices. I figured it was all mountain superstition and mental illness. The call came in on a Tuesday morning. 3 hikers had been reported missing on the Appalachian Trail near Blood Mountain. The last anyone heard from them was 5 days ago. Their families were getting worried. I loaded up my Jeep with search gear and headed out. The October weather was unseasonably warm, and we'd been having a drought for weeks. The forest felt dry and brittle, like it was holding its breath. The missing hikers were Jennifer Walsh, a theology student from Atlanta, and 2 friends from Tennessee. Their last known position was at the Blood Mountain Shelter, about 2 miles from the summit. I started my search there, following the white blazes of the Appalachian Trail. The forest was too quiet. No bird songs, no squirrel chatter, just the crunch of my boots on dried leaves. About a mile up the trail, I found their campsite. 3 tents, still set up, but looking like they'd been abandoned in a hurry. Sleeping bags were scattered around, and a cold campfire sat in the middle with partially burned logs. What bothered me most were the personal items left behind. Wallets, car keys, expensive hiking boots. Nobody leaves that stuff when they break camp, and there were no signs of a struggle. But there was something else. 3 Bibles placed carefully on a flat rock near the fire pit. They were soaked through with something dark red that had dried to a rusty brown color. The metallic smell made my stomach turn. I radioed back to headquarters. "Base, this is Ranger Bloodworth, found the missing hikers' campsite. Looks like they left in a hurry, but there's something weird here." Static crackled back at me. "What kind of weird, Kate?" "Religious books covered in what looks like blood. Could be animal blood, but it's a lot of it. Requesting backup and maybe someone from the sheriff's department." "Copy that. Help's on the way." I spent the next hour searching the area around the campsite. That's when I started noticing other things that made my skin crawl. Dead animals scattered through the woods. Squirrels, rabbits, a few birds. All of them looked like they'd been drained of blood. Their bodies were pale and shrunken. On several large oak trees, someone had carved crude crosses into the bark. The cuts were deep and fresh, and red sap was bleeding out of them like wounds. As I worked my way up toward the summit, I kept hearing something that made me stop and listen. Singing. Faint and far away, but definitely human voices singing hymns. The sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at the same time. I followed the trail markers, but the singing got louder as I climbed higher. It was an old hymn I remembered from childhood church services. "Are you washed in the blood?" The words echoed through the trees in perfect harmony, but there was nobody around for miles. I checked my radio again, but all I got was static, mixed with what sounded like voices speaking in tongues. By the time I reached the area just below the summit, the sun was getting low. The temperature should have been dropping with evening coming on, but it felt hotter than it had all day. The air was thick and humid, like before a thunderstorm, but the sky was clear. That's when I saw the first person. A man in hiking clothes was standing about 50 yards off the trail, perfectly still, staring up at the summit. I called out to him, but he didn't respond. As I got closer, I could see his lips moving, but no sound was coming out. "Sir, are you okay?" I asked. He turned toward me, and I saw his eyes. They were completely white, rolled back so far I couldn't see any iris or pupil, but somehow he was still looking right at me. "The mountain has called us," he said in a voice that didn't sound like it belonged to him. "The blood of the Lamb runs pure here. Will you join the congregation, sister?" I backed away, my hand moving to my radio. "I'm a forest ranger. Are you hurt? Do you need medical attention?" He smiled, and when he did, I saw that his teeth and gums were stained dark red. "The Lord has shown me things about you, Sister Kate. How you lost your faith when you couldn't save that little girl in the ambulance. How you blamed God for taking her when you did everything right." My blood went cold. Nobody knew about that call. It had happened 7 years ago in a different county. A car accident with a 5-year-old girl who died despite everything I did to save her. It was the reason I'd left emergency medical work. "How do you know about that?" I whispered. But when I looked up, he was gone. Just vanished into the woods like he'd never been there at all. I was still staring at the empty space where he'd been standing when my backup arrived. Ranger Tom Hillcrest and Deputy Sheriff Mike Coleman hiked up just as darkness was settling over the mountain. Tom was a good man, been working these woods for almost as long as I had. Mike was young and eager, probably his first real missing persons case. "Kate, you look like you've seen a ghost," Tom said as they approached. I told them about the abandoned campsite, the blood-soaked Bibles, and the dead animals. I left out the part about the man with white eyes. It sounded crazy even to me. "Could be some kind of cult activity," Mike said, shining his flashlight around the darkening forest. "We've had reports of weird religious groups moving through the mountains." Tom nodded. "Remember that snake-handling church that got kicked out of Habersham County last year? Maybe they're conducting ceremonies up here." We decided to set up camp for the night and continue searching in the morning. Mike radioed for a crime scene team to come out and process the abandoned campsite. Tom and I pitched our tents about a quarter-mile up the trail from where the hikers had been staying. Around midnight, the singing started again. This time, all 3 of us heard it. Voices coming from the direction of the summit, maybe 24 people singing "Nothing But the Blood of Jesus" in perfect harmony. The sound was so clear and beautiful it gave me chills. "That's got to be them," Mike said, grabbing his flashlight and radio. "The missing hikers. They're having some kind of religious service up there." Tom was already packing his gear. "We need to check it out. If they're okay, we can all go home." But something felt wrong to me. The singing was too perfect, too coordinated, and it was coming from the exact spot where I'd encountered the man with white eyes. We hiked up the trail by flashlight, following the sound. The closer we got to the summit, the warmer the air became. By the time we reached the rocky outcrop at the top of Blood Mountain, we were all sweating despite the October night. The singing stopped the moment we crested the ridge. The summit was empty, just bare rock and a few scrub trees. But the air still vibrated with the echo of voices, and there was a smell in the air like cop, pennies and candle wax. "Where did they go?" Mike whispered, sweeping his flashlight beam across the rocky ground. That's when Tom found the first piece of evidence that this wasn't just missing hikers having a prayer meeting. In the center of the summit, someone had arranged human bones in the shape of a cross. They were old, yellowed with age, but clearly human arm and leg bones. At the head of the cross sat a human skull with 1847 carved into the forehead. "Jesus Christ," Mike breathed. "What is this place?" Tom was examining the bones with his flashlight. "These have been here a long time. Look at the weathering. But someone arranged them recently. The dirt underneath is disturbed." I walked around the bone cross, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Mixed in with the old bones were modern items. A hiking boot, a college ID card for Jennifer Walsh, a tent stake that matched the ones at the abandoned campsite. "They were here," I said. "The missing hikers. But where are they now?" That's when we heard the voice. It came from everywhere at once, echoing off the rock faces around the summit. A man's voice, deep and commanding, speaking with the rhythm and cadence of an old-time preacher. "Children of God, you have come to witness the glory of the Lord. The mountain has called you to join our eternal congregation." Mike spun around, his hand on his service weapon. "Who's there? Show yourself." The voice continued as if he hadn't spoken. Sister Kate, the mountain knows you. Your ancestor, Ezekiel Bloodworth, brought the true faith to this place in 1847. His blood sanctified this ground. Your blood will complete the circle. I felt like ice water had been poured down my spine. Bloodworth was my maiden name, but I'd never heard of any Ezekiel. My family had never talked much about our history in these mountains. You're lying, I called out to the empty summit. I don't know what kind of sick game this is, but you're going to release those hikers right now. Laughter echoed from the rocks, rich, warm laughter that sounded genuinely delighted. Sweet, a child, they have not been taken. They have been chosen, as you will be chosen when your time comes. The temperature on the summit suddenly spiked. What had been a cool October night became oppressively hot and humid. The air shimmered with heat waves, and the smell of sulfur mixed with the metallic odor of blood. Tom grabbed my arm. Kate, we need to get out of here, now. But Mike was standing at the edge of the summit, looking down into the valley below. His flashlight beam was pointed straight down, illuminating something in the trees about 100 feet below the rocky outcrop. I can see them, he said in a strange, dreamy voice. The missing hikers. They're down there, and they're not alone. Tom and I rushed to the edge and looked where Mike was pointing. In a small clearing below, we could see the glow of a campfire. Figures were moving around it, maybe a dozen people. They were dressed in a mix of modern hiking clothes and what looked like old-fashioned religious garments. We have to help them, Mike said, and before either Tom or I could stop him, he started climbing down the steep rock face toward the clearing. Mike, wait, Tom called, but the deputy was already 20 feet down and moving fast. We had no choice but to follow. Tom went next and I brought up the rear, my medical training making me careful about the climb. The rocks were slick with moisture despite the drought, and more than once I nearly lost my grip. By the time we reached the clearing, Mike was already at the edge of the campfire circle. The figures around the fire turned to look at us, and I saw that 3 of them were indeed the missing hikers. Jennifer Walsh and her 2 friends were sitting cross-legged on the ground, staring into the flames with glassy, unfocused eyes. But the other people around the fire were wrong. They looked real enough from a distance, but up close I could see through them. Translucent figures in 1800s clothing, their faces pale and gaunt, their eyes burning with fanatical fervor. At the head of the circle sat a tall, bearded man in a black preacher's coat. Unlike the others, he seemed solid, real. When he smiled at us, I could see that his teeth were stained dark red. "Welcome, children," he said in the same voice that had echoed from the summit. "I am Brother Ezekiel Bloodworth, servant of the Most High God. You have come just in time for evening communion." Tom had his radio out, trying to call for backup, but all that came through the speaker was the sound of hymn singing and people speaking in tongues. The ghostly figures around the fire began to chant in unison, "The blood of Jesus, the blood of the Lamb, washes us clean, makes us whole, feeds our souls." Mike walked toward the fire like he was in a trance. "I can feel it," he whispered. "The presence of the Lord. It's beautiful." Brother Ezekiel held up a crude wooden cup. Even from where I stood, I could smell what was in it. Blood. Fresh, warm, human blood. "Drink, my children," the ghostly preacher said. "Take and drink, for this is the blood of the covenant, shed for the remission of sins." Jennifer Walsh reached for the cup with shaking hands. Her friends were nodding and smiling, their eyes still unfocused and dreamy. Mike was walking closer to the fire, his weapon forgotten at his side. That's when I realized what was happening. This wasn't just some mountain cult or religious ceremony. These were the spirits of people who had died on this mountain over a century ago, and they were trying to recruit new members for their eternal congregation. And they were using my own ancestor to do it. I grabbed Tom's arm before he could get any closer to the fire. "We have to get out of here, now. This isn't real." But Tom was staring at the ghostly congregation with the same glazed expression I'd seen on the others. "Can't you feel it, Kate? The presence of the divine, the peace that surpasses understanding." Brother Ezekiel's eyes met mine across the seat. Campfire. Even though he looked like a man from the 1800s, his gaze was sharp and intelligent and completely focused on me. Sister Kate, your friends feel the call of the Lord. Why do you resist? Your blood is sacred to this mountain. Your ancestor led 37 souls to salvation on this very spot. Salvation? I backed away from the fire, pulling Tom with me. You're talking about murder. Mass suicide. The ghostly preacher laughed. Death is the doorway to eternal life, child. We have been serving the Lord faithfully for 135 years, waiting for the bloodline to return, waiting for you. Mike had reached the fire circle now. He knelt beside Jennifer Walsh and reached for the blood-filled cup. I can hear him calling me, he whispered. Jesus wants me to drink. I couldn't let this happen. Whatever these things were, they were killing people with some kind of religious mind control. I did the only thing I could think of. I tackled Mike just as he brought the cup to his lips. We hit the ground hard, and the wooden cup went flying, spilling its contents across the forest floor. Where the blood touched the ground, the grass withered and died instantly. The reaction from the ghostly congregation was immediate and terrifying. They all stood up at once, their translucent faces twisted with rage. The temperature around the campfire dropped 30 degrees in seconds, and the flames turned from orange to ice blue. Blasphemer! Brother Ezekiel roared. You have spilled the sacred blood. The ghost figures began moving toward us, and I could feel a crushing pressure in my head, like someone was trying to squeeze my brain. Images flashed through my mind, memories that weren't mine. A wooden church filled with people drinking from wooden cups, men, women, and children falling to the floor in convulsions, blood everywhere. So much blood. The Brothers of the Sacred Blood, gasped, the name coming from somewhere deep in my ancestral memory. You killed them all. We saved them all, the ghostly preacher snarled. Delivered them from sin and suffering into the arms of the Almighty. Tom was struggling to his feet beside me, shaking his head like he was trying to clear it. Kate, what's happening? I feel like I'm dreaming. The missing hikers were still sitting around the fire, but now they were looking at us with expressions of hatred and fanatical devotion. Jennifer Walsh stood up, and when she spoke, it was in Brother Ezekiel's voice. You cannot stop the will of God, Kate Bloodworth. The blood debt must be paid. The congregation must be completed. Mike was fighting against the mental pressure too, his hand moving toward his service weapon. But his movements were slow and clumsy, like he was fighting through thick mud. The ghostly figures were getting closer, and I could feel their cold presence like ice against my skin. Worse, I could feel them trying to get inside my head, filling my thoughts with religious ecstasy and promises of eternal peace. Fight it, I yelled to Tom and Mike. It's not real. It's some kind of mass hypnosis. But even as I said it, I wasn't sure if I believed it. The medical part of my brain was trying to find rational explanations. Hallucinogenic compounds in the water, mass hysteria, carbon monoxide poisoning from an underground source. But the primitive part of my brain, the part that remembered childhood prayers and Sunday school lessons, was screaming that this was something far beyond natural explanation. Brother Ezekiel raised his arms toward the sky, and his voice boomed through the forest like thunder. Lord God Almighty, accept these sacrifices we offer in your holy name. Take their blood as you took the blood of your only Son. Let them join our eternal worship in your presence. The ghostly congregation began to chant in voices that seemed to come from the earth itself. Blood of the Lamb, wash us clean, make us whole. The missing hikers stood up from around the fire, their eyes now completely white like the man I'd encountered earlier. They began walking toward us with their arms outstretched like they wanted to embrace us. Kate, Jennifer Walsh said, but her voice was layered with other voices, older voices, dead voices. Don't you want to see God? Don't you want the pain to stop? And for a terrible moment I did want it. The promise of peace, of an end to doubt and fear and the weight of responsibility. The promise that death wasn't the end, that there was something beautiful waiting on the other side. But then I thought about that 5-year-old girl who had died in my ambulance 7 years ago. How she had fought to live right up until the end. How she had trusted me to save her. "No," I said, and my voice was steady and strong. "I don't believe you. Real faith doesn't require blood sacrifice. Real God doesn't demand murder." The ghostly preacher's face twisted with fury. "Heretic! You deny the sacrifice of Christ himself." "Christ's sacrifice was voluntary," I shot back, my emergency medical training giving me clarity even in this nightmare. "He didn't force anyone else to die. He didn't trick people into drinking poison or cutting their own throats." The ghost figures wavered for a moment like heat mirages. Brother Ezekiel's solid appearance flickered, and for an instant I could see through him to the forest beyond. "Your ancestor understood," he screamed. "Ezekiel Bloodworth led 37 souls to glory. Their blood sanctified this mountain." "My ancestor was a murderer," I said. "And you're not servants of God. You're the spirits of his victims, trapped here by trauma and delusion." The chanting stopped. The ghostly congregation turned to look at their leader with expressions of confusion and dawning horror. "Brother Ezekiel," one of the transparent figures whispered, "she says we're dead. She says you killed us." The ghostly preacher's form was becoming less solid by the second. "Lies! Blasphemy! We are the chosen ones. We are the saints of the Most High." But the other spirits were remembering now. I could see it in their faces. The moment of realization when the religious ecstasy faded and they understood what had really happened to them. "You poisoned the communion wine," another ghost said. "I remember now. My children. You killed my children." Brother Ezekiel let out a sound like a wounded animal. "I saved you. I saved all of you. The world was corrupted, sinful. Only through blood could you reach heaven." The missing hikers suddenly collapsed, the ghostly possession leaving them all at once. Tom and Mike shook their heads like they were waking up from a deep sleep. But the ghosts weren't gone. They were just changing. The religious fervor in their faces was being replaced by something much more dangerous. The rage of people who had finally realized they'd been murdered, and they were all looking at me with desperate, hungry eyes. "If we're dead," Jennifer Walsh said in her own voice, but with the desperate edge of the trapped spirits, "then we need blood to stay here. Living blood. Fresh blood." The temperature around the campfire plummeted. Frost began forming on the trees and rocks. The blue flames turned black, and the smell of decay filled the air. Brother Ezekiel was screaming now, his form dissolving into wisps of smoke. "You've ruined everything. Centuries of faithful service, generations of waiting." But the other spirits weren't listening to him anymore. They were advancing on us with murder in their translucent eyes, no longer interested in conversion. Now they just wanted to feed. The possessed hikers rushed us all at once, moving with inhuman speed and strength. Jennifer Walsh grabbed Tom by the throat and lifted him off the ground like he weighed nothing. Her eyes were solid white, and when she smiled I saw that her teeth had become sharp as razors. Mike got his gun out, but one of the other hikers, a guy named Dave, knocked it from his hands before he could fire. Dave's movements were wrong, too fast and fluid, like his joints weren't working the same way anymore. I rolled away from grabbing hands and came up near the campfire. The flames were still burning black, and the heat coming off them was cold instead of warm. Everything about this place was backwards, twisted. "The blood debt must be paid," Jennifer said in voices that weren't hers. "We have been hungry for so long." But I was starting to understand something. These weren't just evil spirits trying to kill us. They were the victims of my ancestors' religious madness, trapped on this mountain for over a century, slowly going insane with hunger and isolation. "You're not monsters," I called out to them while dodging another grab from Dave. "You're victims. Ezekiel Bloodworth murdered you and trapped you here." The ghostly preacher was barely visible now, just a wisp of smoke and rage hovering near the black flames. "They chose to drink. They chose to follow the Lord." "You tricked them," I shouted back. "You used their faith against them." Jennifer dropped Tom and turned to stare at the fading spirit of Ezekiel. "Is that true? Did you lie to us about God's will?" For the first time since this nightmare began, the ghostly preacher hesitated. In that moment of doubt, I saw my chance. I grabbed a burning branch from the campfire. The black flames didn't hurt me, but they felt heavy and cold in my hands. "Listen to me," I yelled to all the spirits, both ghostly and possessing. "I'm a medical professional. I've seen death, real death, and I can tell you this isn't what God wants." The possessed hikers stopped advancing. The transparent figures of the long-dead congregation gathered around, their faces desperate and confused. "How do you know?" one of them asked. "How can you be sure?" I thought about that 5-year-old girl in my ambulance. She had fought to live. How beautiful and precious that fight had been, even though I'd lost her in the end. "Because real faith isn't about death," I said. "It's about life. It's about fighting to save each other, not giving up and drinking poison because some madman tells you it's God's will." Brother Ezekiel's voice came from everywhere and nowhere, weak but still full of venom. "You know nothing of faith, heretic. You turned your back on God years ago." "Maybe I did," I admitted. "But that doesn't make you right. A real man of God would have helped these people live better lives, not convinced them to die." The ghostly congregation was wavering, literally becoming less solid as their faith in their leader crumbled. Some of them were starting to fade away entirely, finally able to move on after 135 years of being trapped. But others were getting more solid, more real, and the expressions on their faces were getting angrier. "If you're right," Jennifer said, her voice now a mixture of her own and several dead voices, "then we've been trapped here for nothing. We've been suffering for nothing." The temperature around the campfire was still dropping. My breath was coming out in white puffs and ice was forming on the trees. The possessed hikers were getting stronger as more spirits joined with them, their forms becoming a horrible mixture of living flesh and ghostly energy. Tom was back on his feet, helping Mike up from where he'd fallen. Both men looked confused and terrified, but they were fighting off the mental influence now. "Kate," Tom called out, "what do you need us to do?" I was still holding the black-flamed branch, using it to keep the possessed hikers at bay. But I could feel the cold fire starting to affect me. My thoughts were getting sluggish, and I was starting to see double. "The bones," I yelled. "The cross made of bones on the summit. That's what's anchoring them here." Mike understood immediately. He scrambled for his gun and started running back toward the rocky path that led up to Blood Mountain's peak. Tom was right behind him. But the spirits weren't going to let us destroy their anchor that easily. The possessed hikers moved to block the path, and the ghostly figures of the long-dead congregation formed a wall of translucent bodies. "You will not escape," Brother Ezekiel's fading voice howled. "The blood debt will be paid." Jennifer lunged at me with fingers that had become claws. I swung the cold fire branch at her, and where it touched her, she screamed and fell back. But there were too many of them, and I was getting weaker. That's when I remembered something from my medical training. In cases of mass poisoning, you don't just treat the symptoms, you have to remove the source. "Tom," I shouted, "not the bones, the preacher. We have to destroy what's left of Ezekiel." The wispy remains of the ghostly preacher were hovering over the black campfire, drawing strength from the cold flames. But he was weak now, almost gone. If we could disrupt his connection to this place. I threw the burning branch directly at the center of the black fire. The cold flames exploded outward in a wave of freezing heat, and Brother Ezekiel's scream shattered the night air. The possessed hikers collapsed instantly, the controlling spirits ripped away from them. The ghostly congregation flickered like candles in the wind, but Ezekiel wasn't finished yet. With his last bit of strength, he pulled all the remaining spiritual energy on the mountain into himself. His form became solid again, towering and terrible, his eyes burning with centuries of fanatical rage. "If I cannot have my congregation," he roared, "then I will have my revenge on the bloodline that betrayed me." He came at me with hands that were no longer human, reaching for my throat. I had nowhere to run, no weapon left to fight with. That's when Tom Hillcrest did something incredibly brave and incredibly stupid. He threw himself between me and the GH, Ostly Preacher, taking the full force of Ezekiel's supernatural attack. The impact sent Tom flying 20 feet through the air. He hit a tree with a sickening crack and didn't get back up. Tom! I ran to where he had fallen, my medical training kicking in automatically. He was breathing, but barely. Multiple broken ribs, possible internal bleeding, definitely a concussion. Brother Ezekiel was advancing again, but he was weaker now. Using that much energy had cost him. "Your friend dies for your sins," he said, his voice like rustling leaves, "as you will die for the sins of your bloodline." But I wasn't the same person who had started this night. Seeing Tom hurt, seeing innocent people possessed and used as weapons, had awakened something in me that I thought I'd lost years ago. Faith. Not in any particular religion or doctrine, but in the value of fighting to save lives. In the belief that some things were worth risking everything for. "No," I said, standing up to face the ghostly preacher. "I don't accept that. People aren't responsible for the crimes of their ancestors, and you're not carrying out God's will. You're just a murderer who's been hiding behind religion for over a century." I knelt beside Tom and started performing CPR. His breathing had stopped, and I couldn't find a pulse. "Come on, Tom," I whispered, compressing his chest in the rhythm I'd learned years ago in EMT training. "Don't you dare die on me." Brother Ezekiel laughed. "Your medical knowledge is useless against the power of death, heretic." "Maybe," I said, continuing the compressions. "But I'm going to try anyway. That's what faith really is. Not giving up, even when everything seems hopeless." Tom's eyes fluttered open. He gasped, coughed, and started breathing again. The effect on Brother Ezekiel was immediate. His form wavered, became translucent again. "Impossible," he whispered. "The dead cannot return to life." "Tell that to every paramedic and emergency room doctor in the world," I said, helping Tom sit up slowly. "We bring people back from death every day. It's not a miracle. It's science, skill, and refusing to give up." The ghostly preacher was fading fast now. The other spirits had already moved on, finally able to leave this mountain after accepting the truth about their deaths. Only Ezekiel remained, and his connection to the physical world was breaking. "This is not over," he said as he dissolved into mist. "The bloodline debt remains. I will find another way." "No, you won't," I said firmly. "Because I'm going to make sure everyone knows the real story about what happened here, about what you did to those innocent people." The black flames in the campfire flickered and went out. The temperature began to return to normal. The oppressive weight that had been pressing down on the mountain all night lifted like fog in sunlight. The missing hikers were stirring, confused and disoriented, but alive and themselves again. Mike was checking on each of them, his radio finally working properly as he called for medical evacuation. But Tom was looking at me with an expression I'd never seen before. "Kate, what you did back there, bringing me back, I was gone. I could feel myself slipping away, and then you pulled me back." I helped him to his feet, checking his pupils for signs of concussion. "That's my job, Tom. That's what I do." "No," he said quietly. "That was something more. That was faith." Maybe he was right. Maybe fighting to save lives, refusing to accept death as final, was its own kind of faith. Not the twisted, blood-soaked fanaticism of Ezekiel Bloodworth, but something clean and strong and worth believing in. The spirits were gone. The mountain was free. And for the first time in years, I felt like I might actually be able to sleep without nightmares. The official report listed the incident as mass food poisoning from contaminated water source resulting in temporary psychological disturbance. The area was closed for environmental testing, and I was commended for my medical response to the emergency. Nobody mentioned the ghostly congregation or the possessed hikers or the centuries-old bones arranged in a cross on the summit. Those details stayed between me, Tom, Mike, and the 3 missing hikers who had been found alive but with no clear memory of what had happened to them. Jennifer Walsh transferred to a different school and changed her major from theology to psychology. She sent me a letter a few months later saying she was studying cult behavior and religious manipulation. She never directly mentioned what had happened on Blood Mountain, but she thanked me for helping her understand the difference between faith and fanaticism. Tom recovered fully from his injuries, though he was never quite the same afterward. He became more serious, more thoughtful. Sometimes I'd catch him staring at the mountains with a distant expression, like he was remembering something he couldn't quite put into words. Mike left the sheriff's department and became a paramedic. He said the experience on Blood Mountain had shown him that saving lives was more important than arresting criminals. As for me, I started studying the history of religious communities in the Appalachian Mountains. I found records of the Brothers of the Sacred Blood in the Cherokee County Historical Society, an extremist sect led by Ezekiel Bloodworth that had disappeared in 1847 under mysterious circumstances. According to the documents, 37 people had died in what appeared to be a mass suicide by poisoning. But the contemporary accounts suggested that most of the victims hadn't known what they were drinking until it was too late. Ezekiel Bloodworth, my distant ancestor, had convinced his followers that God required their sacrifice to cleanse the mountain of Cherokee heathen spirits. The truth was simpler and more horrible. He had been slowly going insane from isolation and religious extremism, and he had taken 36 innocent people with him into death. I had their remains properly buried in the Cherokee County Cemetery, with individual headstones listing their names and ages. The youngest had been only 8 years old. The bones that had formed the cross on Blood Mountain summit were never found when the investigation team reached the area. They had simply vanished, along with all traces of the supernatural events that had occurred that night. But I knew they were finally at peace. I still work as a forest ranger in the Chattahoochee National Forest, though I've developed a specialty in handling what the official reports call mass psychological incidents. It's amazing how many of those happen in remote areas with histories of religious extremism. I've learned to recognize the signs: unexplained animal deaths, religious artifacts appearing where they shouldn't be, sudden temperature changes, and that particular quality of silence that means something is very wrong with the natural world. Most importantly, I've learned that real faith, the kind worth having, isn't about blind obedience to charismatic leaders or dramatic sacrifices to prove devotion. It's about the quiet, everyday decision to keep fighting for life, even when death seems easier. Every time I successfully bring someone back from cardiac arrest or pull a lost hiker out of a dangerous situation, I think about that night on Blood Mountain, about Tom's eyes opening when his heart had stopped, about the moment when science and skill and pure stubborn refusal to give up brought him back from wherever he had been going. That's my kind of miracle now, the kind you can learn, practice, and teach to others. Blood Mountain is peaceful these days. The Appalachian Trail still crosses the summit, and hikers still camp in the area. The temperature anomalies stopped after that October night in 1982, and the wildlife returned to normal patterns. But sometimes, especially in October when the leaves are terse, and the air gets crisp, I'll hike up to the summit just to check on things. Not because I think Ezekiel Bloodworth will return. His spirit was broken when the other souls finally moved on and his lies were exposed. But because there are other mountains in Appalachia, other isolated communities with dark histories, and other charismatic madmen who mistake their own delusions for divine revelation. I've become something of an expert on what the Park Service quietly calls heritage-related incidents. Religious extremism has deep roots in these mountains, going back to the earliest settlers who came here seeking freedom from persecution, but sometimes brought their own capacity for persecution with them. There was the incident at Brasstown Bald in 1985, where a modern snake-handling church got involved with something much older and more dangerous than venomous reptiles. The situation at Springer Mountain in 1987, where a group of hikers encountered what they thought was a historical reenactment, but turned out to be something that had never really ended. Each time, the pattern was similar. Isolated locations with histories of religious violence, charismatic leaders who used faith as a weapon. Innocent people caught up in spiritual manipulation that had supernatural consequences. And each time the solution wasn't exorcism or holy water or dramatic confrontations between good and evil. It was education, medical intervention, and the simple human refusal to accept that death and suffering were God's will. I keep a small cross in my ranger station now, not because I've returned to organized religion, but because I've learned that symbols matter. The cross on my desk isn't about sacrifice and blood and divine punishment. It's about the intersection of human and divine, about the choice to value life over death, hope over despair. Tom asked me once if I thought we actually encountered the supernatural that night, or if it was all some kind of mass hallucination brought on by environmental factors we didn't understand. I told him it didn't matter, whether the spirits of the brothers of the sacred blood were real or just psychological projections of guilt and trauma. The important thing was that we had refused to let them hurt anyone else. We had chosen to fight for life instead of accepting death. That's faith enough for me. The mountains keep their secrets, but they also keep their lessons. Blood Mountain taught me that the most dangerous monsters aren't the ones that howl in the darkness. They're the ones that quote scripture while they sharpen their knives. They're the ones who convince good people that evil acts are holy, that murder is mercy, that death is the door to paradise. But it also taught me that ordinary people doing ordinary jobs, rangers, paramedics, sheriffs, doctors, can be the difference between life and death. That sometimes the most profound act of faith is simply refusing to give up on each other. I still patrol these mountains, still search for lost hikers, still provide emergency medical care in remote locations. And sometimes, late at night when I'm alone in the forest, I can still hear echoes of that ancient hymn, "Are you washed in the blood?" But now when I hear it, I think about the blood that flows through living veins, carrying oxygen to working hearts and thinking brains. I think about the blood I've helped preserve through CPR and first aid, and the stubborn insistence that death is not always final. That's the only blood that matters. The blood of the living, fighting to stay alive. The rest is just madness dressed up in Sunday clothes. My name is Michael Stonemason, but everyone calls me Mick. I've been a ranger here in the Monongahela National Forest for 11 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything these West Virginia mountains could throw at me. Bears, lost hikers, illegal hunters, nothing I couldn't handle with common sense and a good radio. But I was wrong about that. November 1979 was colder than usual, with freezing rain that made every trail slick as glass. I was sitting in my office going through paperwork when Sheriff Davies called about the missing survey team. Environmental folks from the state had been up at Coal Hollow for 2 weeks, testing the water where the old strip mines left their mark. Acid mine drainage, they called it. Poisoned water that killed fish and turned streams orange. "Found their trucks this morning," Davies said over the crackling phone line. "Engines still running, equipment set up like they just stepped away for lunch, but there's something strange, Mick." "Strange how?" "Everything's covered in coal dust, thick as snow. But there ain't been any mining up there since the 40s. I knew Coal Hollow. It was 25 miles from the nearest town, up roads that barely deserved the name. The old mining company had torn the mountainside apart in the 20s and 30s, then walked away when the coal got too deep to strip. Left behind were water-filled pits, black as oil, and piles of broken rock that nothing would grow on. "I'll head up there now," I told Davies. My grandfather had worked those mines before they went to strip mining. He used to tell me stories about the underground shafts, how the men would go down before dawn and come up after dark, never seeing sunlight except on Sundays. He'd worked the night shift on November 15th, 1943, but called in sick with a bad cough. That was the night 47 men died in an explosion that shook Windows 15 miles away. Dad always said Grandpa carried guilt about that his whole life, said he should have been down there with his friends. The drive up to Coal Hollow took 2 hours on roads that got worse with every mile. Potholes deep enough to swallow a tire, washouts from decades of acid rain runoff. My truck bounced and lurched, and I had to use 4-wheel drive for the last 10 miles. When I finally reached the hollow, I understood why Davies sounded spooked. 2 state vehicles sat in the middle of what used to be the main mining area. A pickup truck and a van, both with their engines running, exhaust visible in the cold air. Their headlights cut through the gray November afternoon like twin beams trying to hold back the dark. And everything, the trucks, the ground, The abandoned mining equipment scattered around the site was covered in a thick layer of coal dust. I parked and got out, my boots crunching on what should have been frozen mud but felt like walking on powdered charcoal. The silence hit me first. No birds, no wind, no sound except the rumble of those running engines. Even my footsteps seemed muffled. The dust was everywhere, but it wasn't random. It formed patterns, swirls and lines that looked almost like footprints. Dozens of them, leading from the trucks toward the old mine entrance that had been sealed with concrete back in the 50s. I pulled out my radio. "Base, this is Stonemason. I'm at Coal Hollow. The missing team's vehicles are here, but no sign of the people." Static answered me. I tried again, adjusting the frequency, but got nothing but white noise that sounded almost like voices whispering. That's when I noticed my methane detector clicking. The little MSA unit on my belt was designed to warn about dangerous gas buildup in old mine areas, but the needle was jumping all over the place like it couldn't make up its mind. I walked over to the first truck. The driver's door was open, keys in the ignition, coffee cup still warm in the holder. A clipboard on the seat showed water test results from the past week. The pH readings made no sense. Some showed normal levels, others showed acid levels that would eat through metal. The van held survey equipment worth more than my annual salary. Computers, testing gear, sample containers, all of it powered up and running, but covered in that same fine black dust. I found a notebook on the dashboard, pages fluttering in a breeze I couldn't feel. The last entry was dated yesterday. Day 12. Coal dust accumulation continues despite no mining activity. Team leader Dr. Woodland reports strange dreams about being trapped underground. Gas readings inconsistent. Something is very wrong here. The writing got shaky toward the end, like whoever wrote it was scared. I looked around at the hollow, really looked at it for the first time. The strip mining had carved terraces into the mountainside like giant steps, each one flooded with black water that reflected the gray sky. Rusted machinery sat where the company had abandoned it. Conveyor belts, crushers, rail cars that would never move again. But some of the equipment looked different, cleaner, like someone had been maintaining it. That's when I heard the sound. Tap, 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 rhythmic, steady, coming from somewhere deeper in the hollow. I followed the sound, my boots leaving prints in the coal dust. The tapping got louder as I approached the sealed mine entrance, a concrete wall built into the mountainside with a metal sign that read, "Danger, do not enter, unstable." The tapping was coming from behind the concrete, from inside the mountain. Tap, tap, tap. Like someone with a pickaxe working the coal seam. But that was impossible. The mine had been sealed for 30 years. Nobody could be alive in there. I pressed my ear to the cold concrete. The tapping stopped. Then I heard something that made my blood freeze. Voices. Dozens of them, calling for help. I stumbled back from the concrete wall, my heart hammering. The voices faded, but I could still hear them, muffled, distant, desperate. Men calling out in the darkness behind tons of rock and concrete. "Help us! We're trapped! Please, someone help! Can't breathe! Can't!" I grabbed my radio again, still nothing but static that almost sounded like whispers. My methane detector was going crazy now, the needle jumping back and forth between safe and danger zones. I walked around the sealed entrance, looking for any crack or opening. The concrete looked solid, but there were fresh tool marks in it, scratches and gouges that hadn't been there before, like someone had been trying to dig through from the outside, or the inside. The coal dust was thicker here, swirling in patterns that made no sense. It moved against the wind, forming shapes that looked almost like people before dissolving back into powder. I found the survey team's testing equipment set up near one of the flooded strip pits, water samples in neat rows, all labeled and dated. But when I looked at the test results, my hands started shaking. The pH levels changed as I watched, numbers shifting on the digital readout, going from normal to dangerously acidic and back again, like the water itself couldn't decide what it wanted to be. That's when I saw the first body. Dr. Patricia Woodland was sitting by the water's edge. looking out over the black surface like she was taking a break. Her back was to me, dark hair tucked under a hard hat, clipboard balanced on her knees. "Dr. Woodland?" I called out. She didn't answer, didn't move at all. I walked closer, boots crunching on coal dust that seemed to get thicker with every step. "Ma'am? Are you all right?" When I reached her, I saw why she wasn't responding. She was covered in coal dust from head to toe, so thick it looked like she'd been dipped in black powder. Her clothes, her hair, her skin. Everything was the color of midnight, but the dust hadn't settled randomly. It had formed patterns like someone had carefully arranged it. When I touched her shoulder, she toppled sideways. Her body was stiff, frozen in position, but her eyes were open, wide open, staring at something I couldn't see. Her mouth was open too, full of coal dust, like she'd been screaming when she died. But there were no signs of violence, no wounds, no blood. She looked like she'd just stopped. I checked for a pulse anyway, knowing I wouldn't find one. Her skin was cold as the November air, but not from death. From something else. Something that had drawn all the warmth out of her. My radio crackled. For a moment I thought I was getting through to base, but the voice that came through wasn't the dispatcher. "Ranger Stonemason." It was a man's voice, rough and tired. "This is Ranger McKinnon coming up from the lower access road. What's your situation?" I looked around. There was no lower access road to Coal Hollow. It had been washed out years ago. "McKinnon? Which McKinnon? I don't know any Ranger McKinnon. Been assigned to assist with the missing persons case. I'm down in the old underground section checking the shaft entrances. You need to get down here. We found them." "Found who?" "The survey team. They're all here, but something's wrong. They won't come out. They're working." "Working on what?" Static filled the radio for a long moment. Then McKinnon's voice came back, fainter now. "They're mining. They think they're mining. And Stonemason, they're not alone down here." The radio went dead. I tried to call back, but got nothing. I looked around at the hollow, at the flooded pits and rusted machinery, at Dr. Woodland's body covered in impossible coal dust. Everything was wrong here, wrong in a way that made my skin crawl and my hands shake. But if the rest of the survey team was alive down in the old mine shafts, I had to try to get them out. I walked back toward the sealed entrance, following the coal dust footprints. But now there were more of them. Dozens of sets of prints, all leading toward the concrete wall. And they weren't just from boots. Some looked like the heavy work shoes miners wore in the old days. The methane detector was screaming now, a steady beep that meant dangerous levels of gas. But methane was odorless, and I could smell something else. Something like sulfur and old fire and fear. The smell of fear. That's when I found the crack. It was hidden behind a pile of broken concrete and rusted mining equipment, but it was there. A gap in the sealed wall just big enough for a person to squeeze through. The edges were worn smooth, like many people had passed through over the years. Coal dust covered the ground around the crack, and more footprints led into the darkness beyond. Fresh prints mixed with older ones, some that looked like they'd been there for decades. I clicked on my flashlight and shone it through the crack. The beam disappeared into a tunnel that sloped down into the mountain. The air coming out was warm and smelled like coal dust and something else, something rotten. My grandfather's voice echoed in my memory. "Never go into an old mine alone, Mickey. The mountain doesn't give up her dead easy." But if people were trapped down there, people who were counting on me to find them, I didn't have a choice. I squeezed through the crack, my flashlight beam dancing ahead of me. The tunnel was bigger than I'd expected, carved out of solid rock and supported by wooden beams that looked far too old to be trusted. My footsteps echoed in the darkness, mixing with the drip of water somewhere ahead. And underneath it all, I could hear the tapping again. Steady, rhythmic, like dozens of pickaxes working in unison. The tunnel sloped down for about 50 yards, then opened into a larger chamber. I stepped inside and swept my flashlight around, and what I saw made no sense at all. The chamber was full of Minton's equipment. Not rusty, abandoned equipment like up on the surface, but clean, well-maintained tools that looked like they were in daily use. Pickaxes, shovels, mining carts, even a few of the old carbide lamps that miners used before electric lights. And there were people working. I counted 7 of them, spread out across the chamber, all wearing the same clothes the survey team had been wearing when they disappeared. But they were covered in coal dust, just like Dr. Woodland, and they moved wrong. Too slow, too steady, like machines instead of people. They were mining, hacking at the walls with pickaxes, loading coal into carts, working the seam like this was 1943 instead of 1979. None of them looked up when my flashlight found them. They just kept working. "Hey," I called out. "Can you hear me? I'm here to help." One of them turned toward me. It was a young man I didn't recognize, probably part of the survey team. His face was black with coal dust except for his eyes, which reflected my flashlight beam like an animal's. When he opened his mouth to speak, coal dust spilled out. "New shift starting," he said in a voice like grinding stone. "Better get your gear. Foreman doesn't like it when the new guys are late." Behind him, the others kept working. The sound of their pickaxes echoed off the chamber walls, mixing with voices I couldn't see. Dozens of voices all around us, calling out work commands and safety warnings in accents from decades past. "Time to earn your keep," the dusty man said, holding out a pickaxe. "Time to join the crew." I backed toward the tunnel entrance, but when I turned around, it was gone. Just solid rock, like it had never been there at all. I was trapped in the mountain with 7 people who thought they were miners from 1943, and somewhere in the darkness around us, dozens more voices were calling out, welcoming me to the shift that never ends. The pickaxe was heavier than it looked. The dusty man pushed it into my hands, and I could feel the weight of decades in the wooden handle. It was worn smooth by countless palms, stained dark with coal dust and something that might have been blood. "Come on," he said, his voice still grinding like stone on stone. "Foreman's waiting." I looked around the chamber, trying to find another way out. My flashlight beam swept across the walls, but all I saw was solid rock and coal seam. The 7 survey team members kept working, their movements steady and mechanical. None of them seemed to notice that they weren't dressed like miners, that their equipment was wrong for the time period they were acting out. "Listen," I said to the dusty man. "Your name is... What's your name?" He paused, pickaxe raised halfway to the wall. For a moment, his face scrunched up like he was trying to remember something important. I work the day shift, Section C. Been here since..." He shook his head, sending puffs of coal dust into the air. "Since always." "No, you're part of the environmental survey team. You've been missing for 2 weeks. People are looking for you." But he was already turning back to the wall, raising his pickaxe. "Foreman doesn't like talk during work hours," he said. "Better get started." The voices around us grew louder. I couldn't see where they were coming from, but they seemed to be everywhere, echoing off the walls, drifting down from passages I hadn't noticed before. Men calling out safety warnings, asking for more carts, reporting gas readings, all in the thick accents of Appalachian miners from the 1940s. "Gas buildup in Section B. Need more timber over here. Johnson, bring your crew around to the main seam." My methane detector was still going crazy, beeping so fast it was almost a solid tone. The air down here was thick with gas, thick enough to kill if someone struck a spark. But the ghostly miners around me were using carbide lamps and metal tools, creating sparks with every strike. That's when I realized what I was seeing. This weren't just ghosts or spirits. They were the men who died in the 1943 explosion, still working the shift they never finished. And they were recruiting the living to join them. "We need help," one of the real survey team members said without looking up from the coal seam she was attacking. It was a woman with graying hair, probably in her 50s. She swung her pickaxe with mechanical precision, sending coal chunks flying. "The work never ends. There's always more coal to dig." "How long have you been down here?" I asked her. "Time doesn't work right down here," she said. "Could be days, could be years. Started when we came to test the water. The dust got in our lungs, in our minds. Started hearing the voices, telling us about the work that needed doing. She paused and looked at me for the first time. Her eyes were clouded with coal dust, but I could see the person underneath, fighting to get out. They won't let us leave until the seam is worked out. But the seam never ends, goes down forever into the mountain. A new voice cut through the others, louder and more commanding. "Who's the new man?" I turned toward the voice and saw him walking out of a passage I would have sworn wasn't there before. He was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing overalls and a hard hat with a carbide lamp. Unlike the others, he wasn't covered in coal dust. He looked solid, real, like he belonged in 1943 instead of being trapped there. "Name's Coleridge," he said, extending a hand. "Jacob Coleridge, shift foreman. You look familiar, son. You got mining in your blood?" I didn't want to shake his hand, but I found myself doing it anyway. His grip was strong, calloused, and cold as the November air outside. "My grandfather worked here. Samuel Stonemason." Coleridge's face lit up with recognition. "Sam Stonemason. Good man, good miner. Should have been here the night of the big blast, but he called in sick." His expression darkened. "Lucky for him, unlucky for us." "What do you mean?" Company knew the gas was building up, knew the ventilation was bad. We told them over and over, but they said production couldn't stop, had quotas to meet, money to make. He gestured around the chamber. 47 good men died that night because the company put profits over safety. The other voices grew louder, angrier. I could feel their rage building in the air around us, making the methane detector scream even louder. "They sealed us in," Coleridge continued. "Didn't even try to recover the bodies. Just poured concrete over the entrance and called it a mining accident. Told the families there was nothing to recover." "That was 36 years ago," I said. "Time doesn't mean much when you're dead," Coleridge replied. "But the work has to be finished. The coal has to be dug. It's what we were born for, what we died for." He looked at me with eyes that held decades of anger and grief. "Your grandfather should have been here with us. He owes us a debt, and blood pays blood. You're going to help us collect." That's when I understood. The 47 miners hadn't just died in the explosion. They'd been trapped here, unable to move on because of the injustice of their deaths. And they wanted someone from the Stonemason family to pay the price my grandfather had avoided by getting sick that night. "I can help you," I said, backing away from Coleridge. "I can expose what the company did, get your families the justice they deserve. But not like this." "Justice?" Coleridge laughed, a sound like rocks grinding together. "It's too late for justice. All that's left is the work, the eternal work in the darkness, mining coal that'll never see daylight." The survey team members had stopped their digging and were watching us now. I could see them fighting against whatever force was controlling them, trying to break free. But the coal dust in their lungs, in their blood, was too strong. "Join us willing," Coleridge said, raising a pickaxe of his own. "Or we'll make you join us anyway. Either way, the stonemason debt gets paid tonight." The invisible miners around us began to materialize, their forms made of coal dust and methane gas and 40 years of rage. They filled the chamber, dozens of men in mining gear from the 1940s, all of them watching me with dead eyes that reflected my flashlight beam. My grandfather's guilt had been handed down to me, and there was nowhere left to run. The ghostly miners pressed in around me, their forms shifting between solid coal dust and empty air. I could smell them now, old sweat, coal smoke, and the sharp scent of methane gas that had killed them decades ago. My detector was screaming so loud I couldn't hear my own thoughts. "Your grandfather lived with guilt his whole life," Coleridge said, stepping closer. The other miners moved with him, their pickaxes ready. "Knew he should have died with us that night. Now you get to make it right." I backed against the chamber wall, rough coal scratching against my jacket. The survey team members were watching with those dust-clouded eyes, still holding their tools but not moving. They were trapped between the living and the dead, caught in the middle of something that started long before they arrived. "Wait," I said to Coleridge. "You said the company knew about the gas buildup. You have proof?" "Course we got proof. Company records are still down here in the foreman's office. They knew the ventilation was bad, knew the methane was building up, but they pushed us to keep digging anyway. Had to meet that production quota. Then that's how I can help you. I can take those records to the surface, get the story out, make sure people know what really happened. Coleridge laughed, but some of the other miners looked uncertain. I could see doubt creeping across their dust-covered faces. It's too late for that, Coleridge said. Should have been done 40 years ago. Now, all we got left is the work and the anger and the need to balance the books. But I was already moving, pushing through the crowd of ghostly miners toward the passage Coleridge had emerged from. They reached for me with hands made of coal dust, but I slipped through their grasps like they were made of smoke. The passage was narrow and dark, carved out of solid rock. My flashlight beam danced ahead of me as I ran, showing timber supports that looked ready to collapse and walls that wept black water. Behind me, I could hear the miners following, their voices echoing in the tunnels. Can't run from what's owed. Blood pays blood. Time to settle accounts. The passage opened into another chamber, this one smaller and filled with old mining office equipment. A wooden desk, filing cabinets, charts on the walls showing the layout of the mine. Everything covered in decades of coal dust, but preserved by the dry air underground. I yanked open the filing cabinet drawers looking for anything that might prove the company's negligence. Most of the papers crumbled at my touch, but I found a folder marked Safety Reports, November 1943. Inside were documents that made my hands shake. Gas readings showing dangerous methane levels, maintenance reports about broken ventilation equipment, memos from Coleridge himself, warning that conditions were unsafe and requesting permission to evacuate the mine, and responses from the company managers, telling him to keep the men working no matter what. Found it, I whispered, stuffing the papers into my jacket. This is enough to reopen the investigation to get justice for... Too late. I spun around to find Coleridge standing in the doorway, his form more solid than before. The other miners crowded behind him, filling the passage. Their anger was so strong I could feel it pressing against me like a physical weight. Had 40 years to set things right, he said. Now it's time for payment. He raised his pickaxe, and I saw something I hadn't noticed before. The head was stained with more than coal, well, dust. Dark stains that looked almost like... You killed them, I said, looking past him toward the survey team members in the other chamber. You killed Dr. Woodland and her team. They weren't strong enough for the work, Coleridge said. Coal dust got in their lungs too fast, stopped their hearts before they could join us proper. But you got miner's blood. You can handle the work. The chamber began to fill with coal dust, swirling up from the floor in thick clouds. I could taste it on my tongue, feel it trying to work its way into my lungs. My chest tightened, and I started coughing. Breathe it in, Coleridge commanded. Let it change you. Let it make you one of us. But I remembered something my father had taught me when I was young, back when he still talked about his mining days. If you're ever trapped in a mine, he'd said, find the lowest point. Bad air rises, good air sinks. I dropped to my hands and knees, crawling under the thickest part of the dust cloud. The air near the floor was cleaner, though still thick with methane. I could breathe, think clearly, and I could see something else. A ventilation shaft in the corner of the office, barely big enough for a person to fit through. I scrambled toward it as the coal dust grew thicker above me. Coleridge was shouting commands to the other miners, their voices mixing with the sound of pickaxes striking stone. They were trying to collapse the chamber to trap me here forever. The ventilation shaft was a tight fit, but I managed to squeeze inside. It angled upward, toward the surface, toward clean air and sunlight. Behind me I could hear the miners following, their voices echoing in the narrow space. Can't escape what's owed. The debt will be paid. But their voices were getting fainter, more distant. The higher I climbed, the more solid the world around me became. The coal dust thinned. The methane detectors screaming faded to occasional beeps. After what felt like hours, I saw light above me. Real light. Gray November daylight filtering down through a grate. I pushed against it, with my shoulders, and it gave way, sending me tumbling out onto the mountainside. I was about 100 yards from the sealed mine entrance, near one of the old ventilation shafts the company had used to move air through the tunnels. I gasped in the cold, clean air, my lungs burning from the coal dust, but grateful to be breathing again. The survey team's vehicles were still running, still covered in coal dust. But Dr. Woodland's body was gone from beside the flooded pit. When I looked closer, I could see more bodies scattered around the hollow, the rest of the survey team, all positioned like they'd been working the coal seam when they died. I pulled the company documents from my jacket. They were real, solid proof of the negligence that had killed 47 men in 1943. Proof that could finally give them the justice they'd been denied. But as I walked toward my truck, I could hear them behind me. Faint voices carried on the wind, calling out from the sealed mine. "This isn't over, stonemason. The debt still needs paying. We'll be waiting." I got in my truck and drove away from Coal Hollow as fast as the broken roads would allow. But I could feel the coal dust in my lungs, taste it on my tongue. And I knew that whatever I'd awakened down there wasn't going to stay buried much longer. The story hit the newspapers 3 months later. "Mining company cover-up exposed," the Charleston Gazette headline read. "Documents prove negligence in 1943 disaster." The company had been bought and sold several times since then, but the current owners agreed to a settlement with the families of the 47 miners who died. A memorial was built at Coal Hollow with every name carved in black granite. The area was declared a historical site, and the mine entrance was properly sealed with concrete and steel. It should have been enough. Should have given those trapped souls a recognition they needed to rest. But I still heard them in my dreams. Every night, I was back in that underground chamber listening to the voices of dead miners calling for help. I'd wake, up coughing, spitting out coal dust that shouldn't have been there. My doctor said it was psychological, trauma from the experience. But I knew better. The debt wasn't paid. Not yet. I tried to go back to my regular ranger duties, but Coal Hollow kept drawing me back. I'd find excuses to patrol the area, check on the memorial, make sure the seals were holding. Other rangers started avoiding the place. They said it felt wrong, heavy, like a storm that was always about to break. That's when the accident started. First, it was a hiker who got turned around on the trails near Coal Hollow. We found him 3 days later, sitting by one of the flooded pits, covered in coal dust and mumbling about voices in the mountain. He spent 2 weeks in the psychiatric ward before his family moved him to a facility in Ohio. Then it was a group of college students camping in the area. They packed up their gear in the middle of the night and drove straight to the state police, claiming they'd heard mining equipment operating somewhere underground. The sounds had gone on for hours. Pickaxes, cartwheels, men shouting commands in accents from another era. The final straw came on November 15th, 1980, the anniversary. I was doing my evening patrol when I saw lights coming from Coal Hollow. Not electric lights, but the warm yellow glow of carbide lamps, dozens of them, moving through the flooded pits and around the memorial like miners heading to work. When I got there, I found them. The survey team members, Dr. Woodland and her crew, standing around the memorial reading the names carved in granite. They looked exactly like they had underground, covered in coal dust, moving with that mechanical precision. But they weren't alone. 47 figures stood with them, men in 1940s mining gear with carbide lamps on their hard hats. They were more solid than I'd ever seen them, solid enough to see cast shadows in the lamplight. Jacob Coleridge stepped forward when he saw me. "Thought you might come back," he said, "especially tonight." "The memorial is built," I said. "Your family's got their settlement. The truth is out there. What more do you want?" "Justice isn't the same as payment," Coleridge replied. "Your grandfather owed us a life, and that debt passes down through blood. We've been patient, but patience has limits." The other miners moved closer, forming a circle around me. I could see their faces clearly now. Some young, some old, all of them wearing the marks of violent death. Coal dust in their hair, methane burns on their skin, the look of men who died screaming in the dark. "I can't change what happened," I said. "I can't bring you back to life or give you the years you lost." "No," Coleridge agreed. But you can join us. Pay the debt with your own life, your own service in the darkness. Work the eternal shift until someone else comes to take your place. The coal dust began to swirl around us, forming patterns in the air. I could feel it trying to get into my lungs again, but this time I was ready. I pulled out a miner's lamp I'd brought from my grandfather's old equipment, a carbide lamp just like the ones they carried. My grandfather gave me this, I said, lighting it with shaking hands. He carried it every day he worked, until the night he didn't go down into the mountain with you. The lamp's warm light pushed back the coal dust, creating a circle of clean air around me. He lived with guilt his whole life, I continued. But that guilt made him fight for mining safety, made him push for better working conditions. He couldn't save you, but he helped save others. I looked around at the ghostly faces surrounding me. And I've continued that work. The memorial, the settlement, the investigation. That's how the debt gets paid. Not with more death, but with making sure your sacrifice means something. For a moment, the coal dust stopped swirling. The miners looked uncertain, their solid forms flickering. The work in the mountain never ends, Coleridge said, but his voice was less certain now. No, I agreed. But the work above ground does, making sure miners have safe conditions, proper equipment, fair treatment. That's the real work. That's how you honor the dead. One by one, the miners began to fade. Not disappearing, but becoming less solid, less angry. The coal dust settled to the ground, and the methane smell in the air grew lighter. We'll be watching, Coleridge said as his form grew translucent. Making sure the work continues. Making sure they're not forgotten. They won't be, I promised. I'll make sure of that. The last thing I saw was Dr. Woodland and her team, looking confused and scared but human again. The coal dust fell away from them like snow and their eyes cleared. They were alive, really alive, for the first time since they'd entered the mountain. Coal Hollow is quiet now. The memorial stands undisturbed and hikers can camp in the area without hearing voices in the night. But I still patrol there regularly, still check on things, because I know the 47 are still down there, still watching. And sometimes, late at night when the moon is dark and the wind is just right, I can hear them working. Not the angry, desperate mining of the dead, but the steady, purposeful work of men who know their sacrifice has meaning. The debt is paid, but the work never ends, and that's exactly how it should be. My name is Billy Ashford, and I've been a ranger at Pisgah National Forest for 9 years. I thought I'd seen everything these mountains could throw at me. I was wrong. It was September 1958, and the nights were staying warm longer than usual. I didn't mind. Warm nights meant easier patrols around Looking Glass Rock, this massive granite dome that rises up from the forest like a giant's fist. During the day, it shines so bright you can see it from miles away. At night, though, it swallows the moonlight and turns into something darker. I'd been assigned to night patrol because of my time in Korea. The brass figured if I could handle night combat, I could handle watching for campers who got lost or started fires where they shouldn't. They were right, mostly. The forest at night didn't scare me. Animals doing animal things didn't scare me. I knew the difference between a black bear knocking over trash cans and something that needed attention. My daughter Lucy was 8 that year. After her mother died in childbirth, it had been just the two of us. She'd stay with Mrs. Henderson down the road when I worked nights, coming home to drawings of flowers and deer she'd made for me. That kid was the reason I did everything. The Cherokee folks who lived near the forest sometimes told stories about shapeshifters and moon beasts. I'd always smiled and nodded. I figured these were just old explanations for rabid animals or starving mountain lions. The mountains could be dangerous enough without adding monsters to the mix. The trouble started on a Tuesday. I was checking the logbook at the ranger station when Dave Mountain View came in. Dave was my partner. Good guy, knew the forest as well as I did. But that morning, his face was gray. "We got a problem up near Looking Glass," he said. "Family camping at Site 12. Something tore up their camp last night." "Bear?" "That's what I thought. Ought." He dropped a Polaroid on my desk. Then I saw this. The photo showed claw marks on a tree trunk, deep gouges running parallel, but they were too high up, way too high. Could have been a big bear standing on its back legs, I said, but my voice didn't sound sure even to me. Billy. Dave's voice was quiet. The family's at the hospital. The father got bit. Doctor said the bite pattern was wrong, said it looked almost like what? Like human teeth, but bigger. I felt something cold move through my chest. That's not possible. I know what I saw, Dave said. And there's more. The footprints around the camp, they start as human prints. Then they change. Halfway through a step, they become paw prints. Something big. I grabbed my gear, my Winchester rifle, my Coleman lantern, first aid kit. Show me. The drive up to Looking Glass took 20 minutes on the fire roads. Neither of us said much. I kept thinking about those human teeth marks, about footprints that changed mid-stride. The campsite looked like a war zone. The tent was shredded, cooler torn open, food scattered. But it was the silence that got to me first. Forest should have been full of birds, squirrels, insects. Instead, nothing. Not a single sound. Animals are avoiding this place, Dave said. He was standing near the tree line looking at something in the dirt. I walked over. The tracks were clear in the soft earth. Human prints, bare feet, heading toward the tent. Then, maybe 10 feet away, they began to change. The heel got wider. Toes became claws. By the time they reached the tent, they were paw prints the size of dinner plates. This doesn't make sense, I said. No, Dave agreed. It doesn't. That's when I heard it. A sound from deeper in the forest. Not quite a growl, not quite a voice. Something in between. The hair on my neck stood up. Did you hear that? I whispered. Nodded. D. His hand moving to his rifle. We both stood there listening. The sound didn't come again, but I felt something watching us. Could feel eyes on my back. I'd been in combat. I knew what it felt like to be hunted. This was the same thing. Let's get back to the station, I said. We need to make some calls. As we walked back to the truck, I looked up at Looking Glass Rock. The massive granite face caught the late morning sun, throwing light everywhere. But I could see dark spots near the base, cave openings I'd never paid attention to before. Something moved in one of those caves, just for a second. Something big. I climbed into the truck and didn't look back. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about those tracks, about the bite marks, about that sound in the forest, something between animal and human. Around midnight, my phone rang. It was Sheriff Morton from the county. Billy, we got another one. Couple camping near the water slide. Woman's dead. Man's in bad shape. My stomach dropped. Same thing? Worse. Billy, the man keeps saying something attacked them that looked like a person. Said it walked on two legs until it got close. Then it changed. Changed how? He's not making sense. Keeps talking about bones cracking, about eyes that glowed. Doctor thinks he's in shock, but the sheriff's voice got quiet. There's something else. We found Cherokee words carved into a tree near their camp. Fresh cuts. You know anyone who might know what they mean? I might, I said, thinking of Joseph Ravenfeather, an elder who lived on the edge of the forest. I'll check it out first thing. But I didn't wait for morning. I got dressed, called Mrs. Henderson to watch Lucy, and drove out to Joseph's place. The old man lived in a small house with wind chimes hanging from every corner of the porch. They made soft music in the night breeze. He answered on the third knock, unsurprised to see me despite the late hour. You've seen it, he said. Not a question. Seen what, Joseph? Kekla Kudla, the moon beast. Come inside, Billy. We need to talk. Hi. Faz's living room smelled like tobacco and old wood. He poured us both coffee and sat down with a heaviness that spoke of bad news coming. Your people, he began. They like to think they know these mountains. They make maps, put up signs, build trails, but some places don't belong to you. Never will. The Cherokee legends. Not legends. His eyes were hard. Stories. True stories. Kekla was a warrior once. A great hunter. But he broke the sacred laws. Killed during the dark moon. Hunted for sport instead of need. Showed no respect to the spirits of what he killed. What happened to him? The elders cursed him. Made him into what he hunted. During the new moon, when the sky is darkest, he becomes the beast. Has to hunt. Has to kill. He's been doing it for 200 years. I wanted to laugh. Wanted to tell him I didn't believe in curses. But I kept thinking about those tracks. About the bite marks. How do you stop it? I asked. Joseph shook his head. You don't stop Kekla. You survive him. Or you prove yourself worthy. Worthy of what? That's for him to decide. I left his house more confused than when I'd arrived. But as I drove back toward town, my headlights caught something on the side of the road. A man, standing perfectly still, watching my truck pass. He was barefoot, wearing old-style Cherokee clothing. His eyes reflected my headlights like an animal's. I hit the brakes, looked in my rearview mirror. The road was empty. My hands were shaking when I got home. I checked on Lucy. She was asleep, thank God, and tried to convince myself I'd imagined it. Stress and lack of sleep playing tricks on me. Then I heard scratching at my back door. I grabbed my rifle and moved through the house slowly. The scratching continued, steady and patient. Through the kitchen window, I could see something on my back porch, something big and dark, moving on fours. Legs. My hands were sweating on the rifle. I reached for the porch light switch. The light came on. The creature turned to look at me. It was a bear. Had to be a bear. Except bears don't. Stand perfectly still when surprised by light. Bears don't look at you with eyes that seem too aware, too intelligent. This thing studied me. Tilted its head like it was thinking. Then it stood up on its back legs, 7 feet tall at least, and I saw its front paws were wrong. The claws were too long. The shape was almost like hands. It took a step toward the door. I raised my rifle. The bear, the thing, opened its mouth. And it smiled. Actually smiled, lips pulling back from teeth that were too white, too human. Then it dropped back to 4 legs and ran into the forest. Not like a startled animal, like something that had decided to leave, like it had a choice. I didn't sleep that night, just sat in Lucy's doorway with my rifle across my knees, watching the windows, listening for sounds that didn't belong. When dawn came, I found tracks in my backyard, human prints leading up to my porch, then paw prints leading away. Dave didn't show up for work the next day. I called his house 3 times. No answer. I drove out there around noon and found his truck in the driveway, but when I knocked, no one came to the door. "Dave," I shouted, "you in there?" I heard movement inside. Heavy footsteps. Then Dave's voice, but it sounded wrong. Too deep. Too rough. "Go away, Billy. You okay, buddy? I said go away." Something crashed inside. Furniture breaking. "You need to leave. Now!" I backed off the porch. Through the window, I caught a glimpse of Dave. He was standing in his living room, shirtless, and even from outside I could see he was different. His muscles looked wrong, too big. His hands were clenched into fists, and his fingernails were too long. He turned and saw me watching. His eyes, God, his eyes were yellow. I got in my truck and drove straight to Joseph's house. "It's spreading," the old man said when I told him. "The curse can infect others during the dark moon. Your friend has been touched by Kekla. He's fighting it, but he'll lose unless... Unless what? Unless you end this. The beast has chosen you, Billy. It's been watching you, testing you." "Why me?" "Because you're a guardian of this land, because you have something to lose. Kekla respects courage, but he also respects fear. He wants to see which is stronger in you." That night, the attacks got worse. 2 more campers were killed near Looking Glass Rock. Sheriff Morton closed the entire area, but people kept sneaking in. The forest had a pull to it now, like it was calling to people. 3 locals went missing. Their cars were found with the doors open, keys still in the ignition. I went back to Dave's house with Joseph. My friend was barely human now. He'd locked himself in his basement, and we could hear him down there snarling and throwing himself against the door. "We need to cleanse him," Joseph said. He'd brought sage and cedar, some things in leather pouches that he wouldn't explain. "But it won't hold unless you face Kekla Kudla. Until then, your friend is going to suffer." We performed the ceremony. I don't know what Joseph said. The words were in Cherokee, old Cherokee, words that felt heavy in the air. Dave screamed the whole time. The sound wasn't human. When it was over, Dave collapsed. He was himself again mostly, but he looked like he'd aged 10 years. "Billy," he whispered. "It's in my head. I can hear it. It's calling all of us. Anyone who's been in those woods after dark, it's got hooks in us." "What does it want?" "A fight. An old fight. Says the land needs a new guardian. Says you have to prove yourself or it'll keep killing until—" He stopped, his eyes going wide. "Lucy. Oh, God. Billy, it knows about Lucy." I ran to my truck, drove 90 miles an hour back to my house. Mrs. Henderson's car was still in the driveway. I burst through, the front door shouting Lucy's name. She was in the kitchen, drawing at the table, safe, but the back door was open. "Lucy? Did someone come in?" "The man came to visit," she said, not looking up from her drawing. "The one with the sad eyes. He said to tell you he's waiting at the big rock." "What man, baby? What did he look like?" She held up her drawing. It showed a tall figure that was half man, half wolf, standing in front of Looking Glass Rock. The moon above it was black. "He said the moon is going away soon," Lucy continued. "Said you need to come find him before it's all dark. He said it's time for the hunt." My blood went cold. The new moon was tomorrow night. I called Sheriff Morton, told him to send deputies to my house. Told him not to let anyone in or out except me. Then I loaded my rifle, packed my gear, and headed for Looking Glass Rock. Joseph met me at the trailhead. "You don't have to do this," he said. "Yes, I do. It's coming for my daughter if I don't." "Then you need to understand something. Kekla Kudla isn't evil. He's a guardian. He kills those who disrespect the sacred places, who take without gratitude, who see the forest as something to conquer. He's testing you because you have the same job. You protect this land. I'm not a killer. Maybe not. But tonight, you might have to be." He handed me something wrapped in deerskin. Inside was a war club, old Cherokee design, the wood dark with age and oil. "Iron and lead won't stop him," Joseph said. "But this was made to fight spirits. It's the only chance you have." The sun was setting as I started up the trail. The forest was completely silent. No birds, no insects, nothing. Like the whole mountain was holding its breath. I reached the base of Looking Glass Rock as the last light faded. The granite face loomed above me, dark and massive. I could see the cave openings now, black holes in the stone. And standing in front of the largest cave was a man. He was tall, wearing traditional Cherokee dress from centuries ago. His hair was long and black, but his eyes glowed yellow in the twilight. "You came," he said. His voice was human, but with something underneath it, like gravel and growling. "Good. I was starting to think you'd let your child die instead. Stay away from her." "Or what?" He smiled, and I saw his teeth were too sharp. "You'll shoot me. I've been shot before. Doesn't take." He started walking toward me, and with each step, he changed. His spine curved. His arms lengthened. Fur sprouted from his skin. By the time he was 20 feet away, he was no longer a man. The creature stood on its hind legs, towering over me. It was part wolf, part bear, part nightmare. Its claws were as long as my fingers. Its teeth were like knives. I've hunted these mountains for 200 years, it said. And now the voice was completely animal, deep and rumbling. I've killed hundreds who showed no respect, who took and never gave thanks. Now I want to know, are you worthy to guard this place? Or are you just another taker? It dropped to all fours and charged. I dove to the side as the creature rushed past me. Its claws tore up the earth where I'd been standing. I came up running, heading for the rocks where I'd have cover, but it was fast. So fast, it cut off my path, forcing me toward the cave entrance. I raised Joseph's war club, and the creature paused. You brought the old weapon, it said, sounding almost pleased. Good. This will be a real hunt. It lunged at me. I swung the club and actually connected, hitting it across the shoulder. The impact sent shocks up my arm like hitting a tree. The creature yelped and backed off, and I saw the club had left a mark, the first real injury I'd seen on it. Yes, it growled, you can hurt me, and I can hurt you. It came at me again, but this time it was playing with me, swatting at me with one paw, then the other, driving me back toward the cliff face. My rifle was useless. I left it behind when I grabbed the club. All I had was this old weapon and my wits. The creature's claws caught my shoulder. Pain exploded through me. I felt blood running down my arm. Swung the club desperately, caught it across the snout, and it backed off with a snarl. You're strong, it said, and brave, but that's not enough. Do you understand why I hunt? Why I kill? You're cursed, I said, trying to catch my breath. I was cursed for breaking the laws, for disrespecting the balance. Now I enforce those laws. I protect the sacred places. I punish those who take without giving, who see the forest as theirs to destroy. Its yellow eyes fixed on me. Your people come here with their tents and their trash. They carve their names into ancient trees. They poison the streams. They think they own this land. Do you think you own it? I thought about Lucy's drawings of deer and flowers, about teaching her the names of birds, about how I'd always told her the forest was something to respect, not to own. No, I said. We're just guests here. The creature tilted its massive head. Then why do you guard it? Why spend your nights walking these mountains? Because someone has to. Because if people like me don't teach respect, then people like you have to enforce it with blood. Something changed in its eyes. It took a step closer, and I raised the club, but it didn't attack. You understand, it said softly. You actually understand. I understand you were a guardian once, before the curse, and that's all you've ever been. The creature made a sound, part growl, part sigh. For 200 years I've waited for someone who understood. Most see only the monster, but you see the purpose. I see a man doing a job, a terrible job, but necessary. Will you help me? It asked. Will you be the guardian this place needs? Not just a ranger with a badge, but someone who truly protects the balance. Someone who will teach your people to respect what cannot be owned? And if I say yes, what happens to you? I rest. The curse breaks. Finally, I rest. I lay, oaked up at Looking Glass Rock, at the dark granite against the darker sky. The new moon was rising, invisible, but I could feel it, could feel the weight of this moment. But you'll test me first, I said. Won't you? The creature smiled its terrible smile. One final hunt. If you survive until dawn, you prove yourself worthy. If you fail... It looked toward the valley where my house was, where Lucy was sleeping. Then I continue my work, starting with those closest to you, those who might follow your path. My blood turned to ice. She's 8 years old. So was I when they began teaching me the old ways. If she is to be a guardian one day, she must understand the cost, must understand what happens to those who fail. It wasn't a monster speaking. It was a test, a cruel one, but a test. Then let's finish this, I said, gripping the war club. The creature charged. For the next hour, we fought across the rocky ground below Looking Glass. It was faster and stronger, but I was desperate. Every time it knocked me down, I thought of Lucy. Every time its claws tore my skin, I remembered why I was here. The club was the only thing keeping me alive. Every blow that connected made the creature recoil. But I was getting tired. Blood loss was making me dizzy. My arms felt like lead. The creature had me cornered against a boulder. It rose up on its hind legs, ready to end this. "You fought well," it said, "but courage isn't enough." I looked up at it, at this ancient guardian wearing a curse like a prison, and I understood. "You're right," I said, lowering the club. "Courage isn't enough. Respect is." I dropped to one knee, head bowed. "I respect what you are, what you protect. If my death is what's needed to keep this place sacred, then take it. But spare my daughter. Let her live to learn these lessons. Let her be the guardian I couldn't be." The creature stood frozen. Secco, ends passed. A minute. The only sound was our breathing. Mine, ragged and pained, its deep and heavy. Then it spoke, and its voice was human again. "Rise, William Ashford." I looked up, but creature was changing, shrinking, fur receding, bones cracking back into human shape. The man from before stood there, but now he looked tired, ancient, and tired. "You passed," he said. "Not through strength, but through understanding. You're willing to sacrifice yourself for what you protect. That's what I needed to see." He touched my shoulder, and the pain from my wounds faded. When I looked down, the cuts were closing, healing in seconds. "The curse is broken," he said. "For 200 years I've waited for someone worthy to take my place as guardian, not to hunt and kill, but to teach and protect. Will you do this?" "Yes." He smiled, a real smile this time, human and sad. "Then my work is done." He walked toward the cave entrance. The sun was just starting to rise, painting the granite face of Looking Glass rock in shades of gold and pink. "What will happen to you?" I asked. "I'll rest, finally, in the old caves with my ancestors. But I'll be watching, William. If you fail in your duty, if you let them destroy this place." He looked back at me. "I'll return, and the hunt will begin again." Then he was gone, disappearing into the darkness of the cave. I stood there as the sun rose higher, warming the rocks, bringing the forest back to life. Birds started singing. Somewhere, a deer moved through the underbrush. The forest was breathing again. I walked out of those mountains as the sun fully rose. The deputies at my house were confused about why I looked like I'd been in a fight, but my wounds were already healed. No evidence except torn clothes and dried blood. Dave recovered over the next few days. Whatever hold the creature had on him broke when the curse did. He didn't remember much, just nightmares about hunting and blood. The sheriff's department declared the attacks were from a rogue bear that had moved on. Case closed. I didn't argue. Some truths aren't meant for official reports. Joseph nodded when I told him what happened. "You carry the old responsibility now," he said. "Are you ready for that?" "I don't know, but I'll try." He taught me things over the following months. Cherokee names for places in the forest, stories about which sites were sacred, how to read the signs when the balance was breaking. I learned to speak the old language, at least enough to show respect. I changed how I did my job, started running programs for visitors about respecting the forest, made sure campers understood they were guests here, not owners, worked with the Cherokee community to identify sacred sites and protect them. Lucy grew up knowing these lessons. She's 16 now, training to be a ranger herself. She has dreams sometimes, she tells me. Dreams of a man in old clothing who smiles and nods at her work. She thinks they're just dreams. I know better. The forest is quiet these days, peaceful. But sometimes, on new moon nights, I walk up to Looking Glass Rock. I leave offerings at the cave entrance, tobacco, cornmeal, prayers in Cherokee. thanking the old guardian for his service. And sometimes, just sometimes, I hear movement deep in those caves, a reminder that I'm being watched. That if I fail, if I let this sacred place be destroyed, the hunt will begin again. I don't plan to fail. I carry the war club in my pack now, not as a weapon, but as a reminder. Every guardian needs something to hold on to, something to help them remember their purpose. The mountains are full of stories. Most people think they're legends, folklore to scare children, but I know the truth. The stories are real. The guardians are real. And they're watching, always watching, to see if we're worthy of the places we've been given to protect. I look at Looking Glass Rock sometimes, at how it shines in the sun, beautiful and eternal. And I remember a creature that was once a man, cursed to hunt for 200 years, finally finding rest. I remember that courage isn't about facing monsters. It's about understanding why the monsters exist in the first place, and making sure they never need to wake up again. My name is Daniel Cragmont, but most folks just call me Danny. I've been a ranger here in Cherokee National Forest for 14 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything these mountains could throw at me. Bears, rattlesnakes, lost hikers, cliff rescues, you name it, I've handled it. But what happened up on Devil's Backbone Ridge in October of 1973 changed everything I believed about what's possible in this world. I grew up in these mountains, born and raised in a little cabin not 20 miles from where I work now. My grandmother used to tell me stories about spirits in the hills, about places where the old Cherokee still walked, about songs that could pull a man right off a cliff. I never paid much attention to those tales. Figured they were just mountain superstition, the kind of stories old folks tell to keep children from wandering too far into the woods. 2 years ago, my world fell apart when my wife Sarah died in a car accident on Highway 64. Black ice, they said. Gone in an instant while I was up here on the mountain helping some fool tourists who'd gotten themselves lost. I couldn't save her because I wasn't there. That's when I really threw myself into this job, helping people in the wilderness like nobody was there to help her. The call came in on October 28th. A gray morning with frost on the ground and fog rolling through the valleys like smoke. 4 college kids from the University of Tennessee had gone rock climbing 3 days earlier and never came back. Their names were Sarah Thompson, Mike Bradley, Jessica Chen, and Tom Willis. All experienced climbers, all carrying proper gear. Their car was still parked at the Devil's Backbone trailhead, but that was the last anyone had seen of them. I loaded up my pack with the usual rescue gear, 150 feet of climbing rope, pitons, first aid kit, emergency flares. My radio was a Motorola HT-220, standard issues. But back then, though it didn't work worth a damn in the deep hollows where the mountains blocked the signal, I had my topographical maps, my compass, and enough supplies for 2 days if needed. The hike up to Devil's Backbone Ridge takes about 3 hours, climbing through thick stands of rhododendron and mountain laurel, following an old Cherokee trail that most tourists never find. The ridge itself is like a knife edge, a narrow spine of limestone with 1,000-foot drops on both sides. Beautiful if you like that sort of thing, but deadly if you make one wrong step. About halfway up, I started noticing things that didn't feel right. The woods were too quiet. No birds singing, no squirrels chattering. Even the insects seemed to have gone somewhere else. When wind blew through the limestone formations along the ridge, it made an almost musical sound, like someone playing a wooden flute far away. My grandmother would have called it the voice of the mountain. The fog was moving wrong too, flowing uphill against the wind, gathering in thick pools around certain rock formations. My compass started acting funny near some of the cliff faces, the needle spinning like it couldn't make up its mind which way was north. I'd seen magnetic interference before near iron deposits, but this felt different somehow. When I reached the base of Devil's Backbone, I found their gear scattered around like they'd left in a hurry. Backpacks, water bottles, extra rope, all just sitting there covered in morning dew. But the climbing ropes were the strangest thing. They hadn't been cut or broken. They looked like they'd been dissolved. the ends all melted and twisted like someone had dipped them in acid. I called it in on my radio, but all I got was static mixed with something that sounded almost like whispering. Probably just interference from the rock formations, I told myself. These mountains were full of caves and underground rivers that could play tricks with radio signals. That's when I heard it for the first time. A woman's voice, singing somewhere up on the ridge, beautiful and sad, like a lullaby your mother might sing if she was crying. The sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, echoing off the cliff faces until I couldn't tell where it started. I looked up at Devil's Backbone stretching into the fog above me, and for just a moment I could swear I saw someone standing on the very edge, a woman in a white dress with long dark hair flowing in the wind. But when I blinked, she was gone. I started my climb up the main face of Devil's Backbone, following the route the missing students had taken based on their gear placement. The limestone was solid enough, but every now and then I'd find a piton or anchor point that looked like it had been pulled clean out of the rock, not by any force I could understand. About 100 feet up, I found Sarah Thompson's journal wedged in a crack. The pages were damp but readable. Her last few entries talked about hearing the most beautiful singing at night and feeling pulled toward the edge like something was calling us. She wrote about dreams where a Cherokee woman in traditional dress stood on the cliff and sang to them, promising to show them secret places in the mountain. The temperature dropped as I climbed higher, which didn't make sense since it was still morning and the sun was shining. The fog got thicker too, until I could barely see 10 feet in any direction. That's when the singing got louder. Not just one voice now, but what sounded like a whole chorus of women, their voices weaving together like a rope that seemed to wrap around my mind. I was about 200 feet up when I saw her. Sarah Thompson, the missing geology student, standing on a narrow ledge about 50 feet below me. She was wearing the same blue jacket described in the missing person report, her blonde hair tied back in a ponytail. She was waving at me, calling for help. "Thank God you found me!" she shouted up. "I've been stuck here for 2 days. The others fell. I couldn't get to them." Something felt wrong about it, but I couldn't put my finger on what. She looked real enough, sounded desperate enough. I rappelled down toward her, my rope sliding smooth through the brake bar. But as I got closer, the singing got louder, and I started feeling dizzy, like the cliff face was spinning around me. "Hurry," Sarah called. "I think the ledge is giving way." I was maybe 10 feet from her when my rope started smoking. The fibers were dissolving just like the climbing ropes I'd found at the bottom, eaten away by some invisible acid in the mist. I looked down at Sarah and saw that her eyes were completely black, no white showing at all. Her smile was too wide, stretching from ear to ear like someone had cut her face open. The ledge she was standing on wasn't even there. She was floating in midair, her feet dangling over nothing but empty space and fog. When she realized I could see through her trick, she opened her mouth and let out a sound that was part scream, part song, part wind howling through a cave full of bones. I scrambled back up my dissolving rope, feeling it give way strand by strand under my weight. Made it back to solid rock just as the last few feet turned to smoking fibers and fell away into the fog below. My heart was hammering so hard I thought it might burst, and my hands were shaking as I tried to get my bearings. That's when I heard my dead wife's voice. "Danny? Danny, where are you? I've been waiting for you." It was coming from deeper in the fog, somewhere up on the ridge. Sarah's voice, clear as day, just like she used to call to me from the kitchen when I came home late from work. For a second, I almost forgot she was dead, almost started climbing toward the sound. But then I remembered the thing wearing Sarah Thompson's face, and I nodded. Whatever was calling to me in my wife's voice wasn't her either. I found the real Sarah Thompson at the bottom of a deep ravine about an hour later. She'd been dead for days, her body broken on the rocks below. Her face was peaceful, though, like she'd been smiling when she fell. The other 3 students were scattered around the bottom of the hollow, all with the same strange smile, all looking like they'd jumped rather than fallen. That's when I realized something had been hunting them, using their own voices against each other, maybe showing them things that weren't really there. Something that could make a dissolving rope look solid, make empty air look like safe ground. And now it knew I was here, I tried calling base station again, but my radio was full of static mixed with what sounded like Cherokee words whispered by a dozen different voices. When I took the radio apart to check the connections, the batteries were ice cold despite being fresh that morning. Whatever was affecting the climbing ropes was getting into my equipment too. The fog was getting thicker, moving in patterns that didn't follow any wind I could feel. It swirled around certain cave openings like it was being sucked inside, then poured out again in streams that flowed uphill. My compass was spinning so wildly it looked like it was having a seizure, and my flashlight beam kept bending and curving like it was passing through water instead of air. I found an old mining camp about halfway up the ridge, just a few rotting timbers and a collapsed cabin that hadn't been on any of my maps. Inside the ruins, wrapped in oilcloth and hidden under a loose floorboard, was a journal from 1897. The pages were yellow and brittle, but I could still read most of it. June 15th. The men are talking about the devil woman again. They say she sings to them at night from the deep tunnels, promising to show them veins of copper, pure as her voice. 3 more didn't come up from their shift yesterday. Found their lamps still burning at the bottom of the new shaft, but no sign of the men themselves. June 20th. Tried to seal the cursed tunnels with dynamite, but the charges won't take. Cherokee woman from the valley came up with some old stones covered in their writing. Says they used to keep something bound down there, but the mining broke the old protections. She won't tell us how to fix it, just keeps saying we should have never dug so deep. June 23rd. She's getting stronger. I can see her now when she sings, standing in the mine entrance like she's been waiting there forever. Beautiful as a sunrise and twice as dangerous. The boys are talking about going to her, letting her show them the mother lode. I tried to stop them, but they look at me like they can't even hear my voice anymore. Only thing that keeps her back is the Cherokee stones, but there ain't enough of them to... The entry ended there, the rest of the page covered in scratches like someone had clawed at it with their fingernails. My radio crackled to life just as I finished reading. Danny, this is Tom Mitchell from District 7. I'm heading up the Devil's Backbone Trail to assist with your search. Should reach your position in about 2 hours. I knew every ranger in Cherokee National Forest, and there was no Tom Mitchell in District 7. Hell, there was no District 7 at all. Whatever had been using the students' voices to hunt them was now using ranger protocols to isolate me further. Negative on the assistance, I radioed back. Maintain your current position until I complete the search pattern. Static filled the channel for a few seconds, then, I'm sorry, Danny, but I'm already on my way. Someone needs to help you find your wife. The radio went dead after that, no matter how many times I tried to raise base station. I was examining the Cherokee stones the journal mentioned, still there, arranged around the mine entrance in a rough circle, when I heard footsteps on the trail below, boots on loose rock, getting closer. I called out, identifying myself as a ranger, but got no answer except those steady footsteps and a low humming that might have been someone trying to remember the words to a song. The footsteps stopped right at the edge of my vision in the fog. I could see the outline of a person, tall and wearing what looked like a ranger uniform, but something was wrong with the proportions. The arms were too long, the head tilted at an angle that would have broken a normal person's neck. You found them, the thing said in a voice that was trying to sound like mine but didn't quite manage it. You found all 4 students. They're down in the deep places now, singing with the others. Who are the others? I asked, though I was pretty sure I didn't want to know the answer. The miners, the Cherokee who tried to warn them. Everyone who heard her song and couldn't resist following it home. The thing in ranger clothes stepped closer, and I could see that its eyes were the same coal black as the fake Sarah Thompson's had been. She's lonely, Danny. She's been lonely for so long. Your wife understands that kind of loneliness, doesn't she? That's when I heard Sarah's voice again, calling from somewhere deeper in the fog. Danny, I'm here. I've been waiting for you in the beautiful place. Come and see what she showed me. The thing wearing a ranger uniform smiled with too many teeth. She's down in the singing caves now, Danny. Down where the music never stops. All you have to do is follow the path. I could see lights moving in the fog behind it, like lanterns carried by people walking in single file. The missing students, maybe. Or the miners from 70 years ago. or every poor soul who'd ever heard that beautiful, terrible song and couldn't resist answering its call. The humming got louder, joined by other voices, until it became that same haunting melody I'd been hearing all day. And despite everything I knew, despite seeing what this thing could do, I felt my feet starting to move toward the sound. I snapped out of it when my bee saw. Oot hit one of the Cherokee protective stones. The moment I touched it, the humming stopped like someone had unplugged a radio, and the thing in the ranger uniform let out a shriek that sounded like metal tearing. It melted back into the fog, leaving only the echo of my dead wife's voice calling my name from somewhere far below. That's when I remembered what my grandmother had taught me. Not the ghost stories, but the real Cherokee words she'd learned from her own grandmother. Words for protection, for asking the old spirits for help, for tobacco offerings that showed respect instead of fear. I had tobacco in my emergency kit, just a small pouch I carried out of habit. My grandmother always said you never entered Cherokee land empty-handed. I scattered some on the protective stones and spoke the words she'd taught me, asking the mountain spirits for guidance and protection. The fog pulled back like a curtain being drawn, and I could see the entire ridge laid out below me. There were caves everywhere, dozens of openings in the limestone that hadn't been visible before. And from the largest cave, maybe 200 yards down the slope, came a light that pulsed like a heartbeat. I could hear her singing now, the real voice behind all the tricks and illusions. It was beautiful enough to make you weep, sad enough to break your heart, and lonely enough to make you want to throw yourself off a cliff just to make it stop. But underneath the beauty was something else. Pain and rage, and a hunger that had been growing for more than a century. I followed a deer path down to the main cave opening, past mining equipment that looked like it had been abandoned yesterday instead of 70 years ago. The Cherokee stones were here too, forming a broken circle around the cave mouth. Most of them had been moved or shattered, leaving gaps wide enough for something to slip through. The singing got louder as I approached the cave. I could see her now in the pulsing light. A Cherokee woman in traditional dress, beautiful as sunrise and terrible as wildfire. Her eyes weren't black like the illusions she'd been showing me. They were dark brown and full of tears that had been falling for generations. "You speak the old words," she said, her voice echoing from the stone walls around us. "You remember the proper offerings. It has been so long since anyone showed respect instead of fear." "What happened to you?" I asked, though I thought I already knew the answer. "My people were driven from this place in 1838. I was a medicine woman, a healer. I bound myself to the mountain to protect the sacred sites, to keep the spirits of our ancestors safe. But then the miners came, digging deep, breaking the old protections. Their deaths, their fear and pain. It changed me. Made me hungry for company in ways I never intended." She gestured to the walls of the cave, and I could see them now. The bones of dozens of people, arranged carefully like they were sleeping. Miners from the 1890s, hikers from more recent decades, and yes, the 4 college students, all with that same peaceful smile. "They hear the eternal song now," she said. "They're not alone anymore. Never alone. Your wife could join them. She's been calling to you, hasn't she? Asking you to come." And there was Sarah, stepping out from behind the Cherokee woman, looking exactly like she had the day she died. Except her eyes were dark and empty. And when she smiled, I could see the sadness that would never end. "I've been waiting for you, Danny," she said in a voice like wind through pine needles. "Down here in the deep places, where nobody ever leaves and nobody ever has to say goodbye." The Cherokee woman reached out to me with hands that flickered between flesh and shadow. "You understand loneliness. You understand grief. Let me end it for you. Let me show you the place where sorrow becomes song, where loss becomes belonging." For a moment, I wanted to take her hand. The loneliness I'd carried since Sarah's death felt like it might crush me, and the promise of never being alone again was almost too tempting to resist. But then I looked at the bones in the cave walls, at the peaceful smiles of people who'd given up everything just to stop hurting. "You were trying to protect this place," I said. trying to keep the sacred sites safe. That's not what you're doing anymore." The Cherokee woman's face twisted with anguish. "The mining deaths poisoned me, made me need things I should never have needed. I can't stop the hunger now, can't remember how to be what I was before." I pulled out the rest of my tobacco and scattered it on the cave floor, speaking every Cherokee prayer my grandmother had ever taught me. "I remember you," I said. "I remember what you were meant to be. You were a healer, a protector. You were never meant to be a hunter." The pulsing light in the cave began to change from cold blue to warm gold. The Cherokee woman looked at her hands like she was seeing them for the first time in decades. I remember," she whispered. "I remember who I was." The change happened slowly, like dawn breaking over the mountains. The Cherokee woman's form became more solid, more real, as she remembered her original purpose. The terrible hunger in her eyes faded, replaced by the wisdom and compassion of a healer who had bound herself to the mountain out of love, not loneliness. She gestured to the cave walls, and the bones began to crumble to dust. Not destroyed, but finally allowed to rest. The college students were the last to fade, and I could swear I saw them smile with real peace before they disappeared into golden light. My wife's spirit looked at me one last time. "I never wanted you to stop living because I died, Danny. Find your way back to the light." Then she was gone too. Not destroyed, but finally free to move on to wherever people go when their stories in this world are finished. The Cherokee woman walked to the cave mouth and began replacing the protective stones, speaking words in her own language that made the air itself feel cleaner. "The sacred sites are safe again," she said. "The old protections will hold, but you must tell others. These places must be respected, not exploited." "Will you be all right?" I asked. She smiled, and for the first time it was entirely human. "I remember what I am now. The mountain needs a guardian, not a hunter. I can be what I was meant to be again." I found Billy Hawkins, the missing teenager, hypothermic but alive in a shallow cave about a mile from the main site. He was unconscious, mumbling something about pretty lady singing, but he recovered fully after a few days in the hospital. He never could remember exactly what happened to him in the woods. My official report mentioned dangerous rock formations and unstable mining shafts. The area was temporarily closed for geological assessment, and when it reopened, it became an unofficial pilgrimage site for local Cherokee who seemed to understand that something important had been healed there. I started studying Cherokee history and language after that, carrying tobacco in my pack whenever I went into the deep woods. The Cherokee elders in the area treated me with respect, calling me the ranger who listens to the old voices. I never saw the Cherokee woman again. But sometimes, when the wind blows through the limestone formations on Devil's Backbone Ridge, I can hear something that sounds like a lullaby. Peaceful now, protective instead of predatory. Other rangers have reported similar encounters throughout the Appalachian Range, places where old spirits guard ancient sites, usually successfully. But sometimes mining or development breaks the old protections, and guardians become hunters. Protectors become predators. The Cherokee elders say these disturbances are becoming more common as development pushes deeper into sacred lands. I still patrol Devil's Backbone Ridge regularly. The wildlife has returned. Birds singing in the trees, squirrels chattering in the underbrush, the natural sounds of a forest that remembers how to be alive. Hikers sometimes report hearing beautiful singing from the ridge at sunset, but they describe it as peaceful, inspiring, the kind of music that makes you grateful to be alive in such a beautiful world. If you ever find yourself in the deep woods, especially in places where the Cherokee once lived, remember to carry tobacco for offerings. Show respect for the land and the spirits who guard it. Listen carefully to the songs the wind sings through the trees. And if you hear singing that makes you want to follow it into the darkness, remember that some voices are meant to guide you home, while others are calling from places where you might never find your way back. My grandmother always said the mountains remember everything, every joy, every sorrow, every person who ever walked their trails. Most of the time, that's a comfort. But sometimes, It's a warning worth heeding. The Cherokee woman still guards Devil's Backbone Ridge, but now she protects visitors instead of collecting them. And sometimes, late at night, when I'm alone in my cabin, I can hear her singing in the distance. Not the hungry, lonely song that once lured people to their deaths, but the healing song of a spirit who remembered her true purpose and found peace in it. That's the song I listen for now when the wind blows through the Cherokee National Forest. It reminds me that some things that seem lost can be found again, that guardians can remember how to protect instead of hunt, and that even the deepest grief can be transformed into something beautiful if you're willing to let it change you instead of consuming you.